Welcome. We're going to wait just a little bit to let everybody sign in. We're still getting people joining us. So, good afternoon, or if you're in Ireland, good evening, and welcome to the ALN's Value, ESG, and ISO governance standards. We're going to start with the presentation by Peader Duffy, who is well connected, and I'm not going to read it all. You see, he's got quite a bit of experience, and we're going to be following Peader's presentation with the discussion with Mary Adams and Jim Dieter. And we want to start by thanking our members, and thank you especially to Onuma Inc. With Onuma System, and they established a new level of membership. So we're very appreciative of that. And our patron members, Jacobs, ABS Quality Evaluations, Definitive Logic, and a new patron member, CGI, an international consulting company, and has a strong focus in federal government. Thank you for joining, and thank you to our organizational members. Without you, we'd not be able to do programs like this. And I'm very excited about this ESG and governance, and to all of our organizational members. If you're interested in membership, look at our website, reach out to me. There's many ways to get involved in our many programs, such as this coming Thursday at 3 program with Peter Kohler, who is the AMC, the Asset Management Council Executive Council Liaison. He has been working with us and Sally Nugent and from Australia also in establishing value and benefits from asset management webinar series, which we're going to have another one on February 7th. And that will be with Kimono Numa and the Los Angeles Community College District, and John Hardwick, who is a asset management star in Australia. And he is currently at the transport in South Wales, Australia. And Peader, welcome. I want to set this up just a little bit by saying that this presentation that we're seeing, Jim Dieter was exposed to this at the end of last year and really saw how it made connections to value of maintaining value and creating value. And so we're looking forward to you giving us a live version of it. We appreciate that. And we were happy we're a network, and we introduced Peader right away to Mary Duffy because she's the ESG expert that we know before Peader, and they hit it off really well. So the discussion should be lively with Jim Dieter joining also. So how you doing, Peader?
I'm doing very well, Mike. Looking forward to the conversation.
All right, well, I'll just step back and let you take controls.
Cool, thank you very much indeed. And thank you to Mary and Jim, and Mary in particular, who will be, I suppose, challenging me, querying me on some of the thoughts I'm going to share in my story, as it were. I'm Irish, speaking to you from the centre of the known universe, which is Ireland. Is it okay for me to share my screen, Mike, so I can go through my deck and tell the story with some visual aids, I guess?
Yes, please do.
Cool, okay, so hoping I don't break the internet. So where are we here? Can you see this?
Yes, we see that.
Cool, excellent. So the origins of the thoughts I'm going to share with you are related to a paper I wrote 2 or 3 years ago on the whole area of quantum risks. And there is at least a metaphorical relationship and correlation between the thoughts I put forward there as part of a different discussion, and value. Value being in the eye of the beholder, how it's perceived, and what it means to different people at the same time across our organizations. I just want to make sure that you can hear me okay and my microphone and so forth, Mike.
Everything is going well, Peter.
Cool, excellent, okay. So Irish, we're kind of storytellers at heart, and I hope to be engaging and telling the story here of value and value at risk. And you might say, well, goodness gracious, what's Peader starting off with here? Peader is the Irish for Peter, incidentally, for those that want to know. This here is a representation of certainly multinational corporations today. This would be a small multinational corporation. It's also a representation of a small to medium-sized enterprise, given the way in which enterprises, be they large, multinationals, or even small. Because today, more and more organizations have, unlike when I was a boy, all organizations were vertically integrated. Everything was done in-house to get the product, the service out to the customer. Now, core processes are outsourced. Now, core functions are outsourced. And what is done inside the organization reflects to what is determined by those at the strategic level to be core to the business model, those things that we reserve to ourselves. And this here describes the mixed array of interrelationships, interconnections that are all required to work in harmony, a kind of a homeostasis, as it were, such that an organization can function, such that at the beginning of the year it starts its prosecuting its mission, and at the end of the year hopes to increase the value. What kind of value is the question then at the end of the year? So organizations today are more complex than they were in the past. In fact, quite a number of years ago, it was discovered first that when we look at let's say the S&P 500 and 1200, that the value of these enterprises today, and discovered back then, but now today for sure, that 90% plus or minus, 90% plus in lots of cases, of the total value of an enterprise now is comprised of intangibles, no longer comprised of inventory, buildings, cash in hand, and for discounted cash and so forth. But there's a whole bunch of other things we cannot see, intangible things that now make up the entirety of the value of that enterprise. A lot of that value exists in these little gray lines between these dots here. And those dots in that picture there, just go back to it for a moment, also help us to understand that, for example, let us say a HR director in this node here, this asset, this building, this place, this entity, what he or she perceives as a risk or an opportunity, or as value creation or preservation, could be perceived differently by a person over here. Because of the different taxonomies, I don't mean just language, of course, but the different taxonomies, different units of measure, and so forth. So the world has got to a point now where the appreciation of value, the interpretation of value is changing. And there's a link here to people that want to download this and get it from ALN. There's a link here to the paper I wrote on quantum risks. And all I did here with this definition was I took a definition of a quantum particle and I simply used that term as a metaphor and added in across systems. Except in this case, we're talking about risks which exist in different states at the same time, across different systems that can't be seen together. One person sees a positive, the other sees a negative. Just kind of hold that thought up there somewhere, right? And by the way, I try and be kind of Socratic in my thinking and storytelling. So I'm interested here in sharing ideas. I'm not interested in trying to present a point of view and saying mine is right. I'm interested in a conversation, a debate, such that together going forward, we can find, we've now got a strengthened understanding and so forth. Good, mature understanding. So I'm a member of a thing called the Value Commission. And the Value Commission was established by the Capitals Coalition. And they set up this project which required the creation of a commission. There are 34 commissioners within it. I'm one of the 34. And it's one of the pieces on the kind of global kind of chessboard where different groups of people are trying to construct an internationally proven and accepted body of knowledge on a range of things, from value accounting, impact accounting, and all sorts of value. And what we are required to do is to produce an open source database of value factors such that organizations will be able to attribute value, for example, the social impact, the social cost of carbon and so forth, and different mixes of things that we've never been used to try to measure before. Might interest people to know that, for example, the International Federation of Accountants put out a white paper some 18 months ago, I think it was, on the whole idea of the perhaps change in title of a CFO, a Chief Financial Officer. That going forward, there could be a case, they've made the case, the International Federation of Accountants, that perhaps given the growth of intangibles, given the difficulty in perceiving what is and what is not value, that perhaps the Chief Financial Officer title should be changed from Chief Financial Officer to Chief Value Officer. Because if the smallest percentile of your assets are tangible, and we in the past have been used to parameterizing those in terms of dollar values, but now with the greater bulk of value and assets being intangible, how do you parameterize that? So the Chief Financial Officer had better be able to put parameters around these intangibles. So the Capitals Coalition, of which I'm part through the Value Commission, have discerned this definition of value, the importance, worth, or usefulness of a thing, very high level. And it's a piece of an overall kind of train of thought and thinking and process and methodology, such that we can understand, come up with internationally proven and accepted valuation criteria and the production of these value factors. So moving on from that, there's another piece to the jigsaw. I'm only covering a handful of these pieces. Mary Adams is a giant in the space of integrated thinking, and she's intimately familiar with this diagram here. And the link to the diagram at the top will bring you to the IRC. This is a depiction of the value preservation kind of framework and model. Things I'd like to point out is, you'll notice there on the left, you got financial, manufactured, intellectual, human, social relationship. Social and relationship means reputational, and natural meaning kind of environmental. These in fact are capitals. Because today, if 90% plus of the value of a thing, of an enterprise, are intangible in nature, then clearly it stands that the value in an organization is no longer just capital value. There is in fact a stack of capitals like this, a stack of 6 capitals. Now, value, the Capitals Coalition would argue there are 4. It's all part of the debate, the dialectic. This mix of capitals that are used, allocated by ultimately the board, but constructed through initiatives and strategies put up by management and approved by board, are put through the business model, which is essentially what happens from input through business activities here, business outputs, and ultimately the outcomes. But the outcomes in the form of the change in the profile of the capitals, different here from the input through to the output. And sometimes when you're making a decision to, for example, launch a new product because we need growth, because the alternate to looking for growth is to, metaphorically, putting the money under the mattress and hoping in 20 years' time it'll have the same value in 20 years' time as it has today. We all know that to be a ridiculous notion with inflation and so forth. So clearly we've got to do something with that money. We must put it to work. We must take a risk such that we would hope that the money today, the $100 today, becomes X, 100X at a future time. But to do that, we're going to have to put financial capital at risk so that we get, for example, maybe an increase in intellectual capital, an increase in human capital. And you have this kind of weaving through, this threading through of the use of capitals to achieve outcomes. So at a board level, at a strategic leadership level, and I'm one of the editors of a thing called ISO 37000, the governance of sustainable organizations. And I'm going to make reference to that very, very near the end of the thoughts I'm going to share with you. So all I've done so far is really just make people aware, if you're not already aware, apologize if you're aware, that the world in the context of understanding parameterizing value is changing and risk is changing rapidly. And in ISO land, of which I'm a participant in both the governance technical committee and also the risk technical committee, we are in the risk side of the land, we're grappling with over 400 definitions of risk. Quite a challenge if ESG in particular, and today's method of understanding value of a total enterprise, if it's all about data, doesn't work, doesn't help to have 400 definitions from a data management perspective. Anyway, that's a different topic, different conversation. So now maybe having set the scene, as it were, if we just take a look at this here. Everything I've shared with you before, other than quantum risks, there are authoritative sources, independent, international authoritative sources that you can click into and research and so forth. From here on in now, I'm applying that to a proposition I'm making. And again, I'm not seeking to convince you that I'm right. I'm seeking to get into a discussion so that together we can improve the thinking and get to a better place. So what I'm presenting here is a notion that there is such a thing as a value at risk continuum, the thing that rests between these two lines here. And this kind of funnel, this continuum, is an overlay on an x-axis here and a y-axis here. The y-axis goes above the x and below the x, value creation above the x and value preservation below. Some people don't like this model, incidentally. They've said, why not play with a kind of a yin and yang where everything is above the x-axis? Perfectly fine. I'm not wedded to the visualization, just to the story of it, and we can improve on this visualization, I've no doubt. And then I'm talking about, okay, so now let's think in terms of decision making, where down here we have kind of operational decision making, and up here on the right, strategic decision making. When we're talking about value, we're talking about value in terms of the capitals that I referred to earlier on. And when we're talking about growth and advancement, we're talking about sustainable growth over time. So, and then of course, three kind of slices through the value continuum in the form of the kind of decision making that's made at the strategic level, bearing in mind the needs, the wants, the desires of stakeholders, because the day is gone as well, where shareholder capitalism is what it's all about. Now it's about stakeholder capitalism. The fact that there is a requirement for an equilibrium. It's not all about the money, as it were. If we're taking something out of the ground to create a product, but we're polluting the waters at the same time and injuring people, is the profit we're reporting at the end of the year real profit? Or is it subsidized by the damage we're doing elsewhere? So stakeholder capitalism and stakeholder kind of purpose-driven thinking up here. And then in the middle strata, the operating performance, where most of us reside, that kind of operational strata. And finally, compliance and prevention. Now look, there could be maybe 5 slices here. These mightn't be the right kind of headings. Don't get caught into that. Just kind of follow the story, as it were. We could discuss later how we can improve on this. So if we start thinking, first of all, in terms of the easiest stuff to talk to, the whole area of decision making at the level of value preservation in day-to-day, stuff that we're well used to, quality assurance, systems compliance, regulatory compliance. For my day job, I work on the global ESG Practice Lead for a software company, the largest governance risk compliance platform provider globally, called Archer, just bought out of Dell EMC 2 years ago by a private equity house. You know, I think 80% of the Fortune 500 use 2 or 3 of our use cases. That's where I work, in the area of ESG, sustainability. Just by the way, to digress a bit, ESG, you've heard of it. These are metrics. Sustainability is a higher, more of a strategic thing. It's about given our purpose. How can we, what ability do we have to demonstrate our viability and our performance over the longer term? Just as thought I'd share that. So right, down here, back to value preservation. The next kind of level up is the area of operational decision making. The value, these folk here were focused more on preservation of value. Here now, we're talking more about the short term. We're going through this rite of passage at the moment from short-termism, shareholder quarter-on-quarter short-termism, to thinking the longer term. That's what the proposed SEC rule is all about as well, in fact, in terms of ESG, you know, for the longer term good, for future generations, and that includes future stakeholders and so forth. So the kind of decisions that are made at this level, business issues, margin management, ESG impacts, continuity operations, things that if we don't get right every day, all the time, every day, we're going to have an erosion of value, destruction of value potentially. And then up here, thinking more at the level of the longer term. In ISO 37000, when we talk about the governance structure of an organization, of course, we're referring to the board of directors. But we also, within our guidance, talk about the thread of governance. Because it's not that the decisions are just made at the board level. Decisions are made at every level, from the boardroom, as it were, to the storeroom. And the ability for the purpose of the organization, the mission of the organization, the values that are meant to influence day-to-day decision making, it should be possible to at least sense that thread from the boardroom to the storeroom through this thread of governance. So these folk here at the top have a very, very difficult challenge, because in fact, if we think about it in our professional lives, at the level of value preservation, particularly in a production environment, for example, Six Sigma, we can measure things, we can master risks, master controls to a level of very high refinement. Because we have data, we have such mastery of controls, we think about risk and return in terms of any deviation from an expected kind of outcome. Lots of control here, lots of mastery here. However, the poor old folk in the boardroom, they don't have all that much data, because we can't predict the future. AI can't predict the future. I don't like using the term prediction in the context of any use of AI, because when I use my Spotify can pretty much pick the music I like to hear. But Spotify only has one variable, me, my taste. And so, of course, it can predict my taste in music. And that's what those AIs that they use will use. And I'm rarely disappointed, because it knows my likes and my dislikes through my selections. I'm teaching the AI what I like and what I don't like. But the folk at a board level, looking forward, have an incredibly complex array of things to consider. The competitive landscape, the regulatory landscape, the operational environments, all the things that can go wrong. And quite often, what's now understood is that propositions that require big, bold bets, decisions, that quite often, when we have these big, what we call value collapse events, right? There was a really good study done in the early noughties, I think it was, or maybe previous to that, by Booz, what was then Booz Allen Hamilton, on value collapse events. Back then, events that precipitated destruction of value in excess of $1 billion. So typically you'd have a commission, you'd have an investigation. What did they understand? What did they find out? What they found out was that the root cause of those big mishaps, those value destructive events, wasn't some financial issue, it was a financial consequence, but it was a strategic misstep on the part of the board, or some big operational thing that was operational and even tactical in nature, had a significant strategic impact. And that in retrospect, looking back, what happened was that most of the assumptions that people made decisions on, those assumptions weren't really tested. And quite often, it's a human thing, or species, assumptions very quickly tend to become kind of cast in stone, as though things we are certain will happen. Assumptions can be toxic. They can be very, very dangerous. But this speaks to the fact that the board, in making decisions looking forward, there's so many things to comprehend, no matter how good the quality of the data, the information that's made available to them. The reality is that they ultimately have to fall back on this human ability to make a decision. Now, we're getting close maybe to the whole question then of the existence of measurable uncertainties on the bottom here and unmeasurable uncertainties on the top here. So let's imagine, for example, the organization that decides we have to, in the interest of growth and fulfilling the needs of all of our stakeholders, they make a very, very significant investment. We're going to open a new facility in a different geography. We're going to invest so much in that facility, in that other geography. The strategic level decision makers, the governance level decision makers, when they make that decision, when they invest those hundreds of millions in a facility, in a campus or whatever, they're not entering into the property management business. They're doing that such that activities can take place. Think about the value creation model that I showed you earlier on. They're doing this so that things can happen within the facilities. I spent 4.5 hours last week with a top 4 accounting firm and their climate scientists and all that. We made a joint bid to a Fortune 100 organization. And we presented how they do the climate scenario analysis stuff. Information goes from there into our software and all that. And you end up looking at a number of different things. And one of those things, for example, would be an inventory of your assets, projected forward to an inventory of potentially stranded assets if weather changes. And one of the authoritative sources in that model that's built out to measure financial impacts is insurance, because there we will have a reference point for the financial value of a building, which is almost straight away poo-pooed. That's irrelevant. It's not the financial value of the building, it's what goes on within it. If it's not functioning, not of high resiliency, high integrity, all the operations flowing smoothly through it. And remember that initial diagram, this organizational blindness diagram, that node of that cog, and the overall machinery of our business model and operating model can't function properly. Wow, our business model is hit under the waterline. Okay, so we get the notion there that the reason that folk up here will invest those hundreds of millions in facilities in one part of the world is of a different order of consideration, business model level, operating model level consideration. Understandably, the people that in facilities and so forth who are meant to mind these places, they're looking at the perspective, valued through the lens of the physical integrity as opposed to its business model, operating model contribution. And here it's relatively easy to do because we can identify the possible things that could go wrong, those things that must go right. We're living in the world here of more measurable uncertainties. Measurable uncertainties tend to go between a figure, between 0 and 1 type of stuff. Consequently, they're insurable. Stuff up here, high, medium, low type stuff that's uninsurable. And so I'm getting near the end just now, but again, sharing the idea that value perceived here is different in context to value perceived here. And it changes in value given situations. For example, two farmers, if you can imagine two being sold at the same time, broadly same activities, same geography, blah, blah, blah. One has poor, let's say, quality or let's say quality or safety records, the other has premium quality and safety records. These are things which kind of traditionally would reside in the value preservation space, quality and safety and all of that kind of stuff. But if one has a very good track record in that regard, and the other has a not so good, the one with a good track record is going to get a premium attached, potentially, to its valuation on sale, on divestiture. If it doesn't get a premium, one thing's for sure, the facility, the folk within it, the machinery within it, that's experiencing a poorer track record, it for sure is going to get a discount. So in that particular context, at a point of divestiture, things were traditionally that were regarded as kind of value preservation practices, all of a sudden now become have a value creation contribution, just because of context. It's kind of yin and yang. Okay, so this then, just in this kind of last slide, or second last slide, I superimpose now on this x-axis these things, which some of the things that are reflected in the eyes of 37,000 governance of organizations. I say governance, I don't say corporate governance. Corporate governance is about board compositions, frequency of meetings, diversity, minutes. Governance, as a thing from corporate governance is a legal thing, a legal construct. Governance is all about knowing where we're going. It's about direction. It's about steering. The etymology of the word governance is to steer. Back in the days when the early Greeks, Hellenic Greeks, steering their ships, they knew where they were, weren't quite sure where they were going to, because they had no GPS back in those days. It's all about the stars, the moon, currents, and wind, trade winds, and so forth. So things like purpose, things like data as an asset and decisions, things like strategies and how you can deploy them, small but often, being agile, the business model, understanding, being able to hold a business model conversation, and the outcomes, different mix, the strengthened mix of capitals at the end of every kind of strategic initiative, and so forth. So these are the ideas that I wanted to share. And at the very end of this slide here, I've got some references here, and also in particular here, Chief Value Officer, Accountants Can Save the Planet, for those of us that are accountants in the room, written by a dear friend of mine, Professor Mervyn King, who's a patron of founding patron of an organization called the ESG Exchange, of which I'm chairman of the technical committee. And we're a collaboration between the ESG standard setters and regulators, producing these how-to playbooks that are derived from the standard setters and ultimately edited by industry through a particular approach we have. And that will be launched formally. It's already launched, but it'll be launched formally later in the year when the first books begin to come out. And in many respects, the ESG Exchange is kind of a living testament to some of the thinking, quite a lot of the thinking that's inherent in the slides that I've shared with you. And really, there's no new thinking in any of this. Really, it's a case of just representing and reshaping stuff that's already known, proven, and accepted, except applied differently in a different context of a world that's growing in uncertainty. With that, Mike, I'd be happy to take challenges and questions from Mary and such like.
Yeah, so we're going to let
Okay.
Jim Dieter take the first crack because he was the one who saw this presentation as really providing a breakthrough. But Mary, you can come ahead and join us. And so, Jim.
Yeah, I was waiting to hear what Mary was going to say, but yeah, so as I mentioned, and we interviewed Peter previously, I want to give credit to Tom Carpenter from an ISO 55000 point of view, that as part of that ISO risk work, he recognized what Peter had done here and its implications for asset management, and shared it with the members of TC 251. So I want to thank Tom from Australia for that. I'm almost catching my breath as every time I hear Peter speak about this, and I learn more about it, and the implications are remarkable. The first thought is being able to graphically display something and in a simple visual way that's pretty understandable is remarkable. Because my first thought of looking at it was, this is what the ALM has been trying to do, been trying to say since we started. And there it is on a chart. And it's really, actually, we're working on a strategic plan revision now, and it's very much about this in ESG. But I'm not challenging. So one of the aspects that I became more aware of today as you were talking about it is the concept of that there's a time element in this, not just it's not a static situation. Anything you could add about the time element from a organizational perspective?
I guess really, time really is a vector for uncertainty, and we're living. I came across a most interesting number from, I think, in 2019 from one of the World Economic Forum reports, and it spoke about in the 21st century alone, we will experience, and we are experiencing, 20,000 years of technology advancement this century alone. 20,000 years. Do you know something? I did a post on my LinkedIn profile just 10 days ago or so, a thing called Chat GPT. There's all this fanfare about this thing. And I created my account, and I asked the machine to tell me, what are the material topics, wearing my ESG hat, what are the material topics that would exist in a multinational transportation company? In the space of 3.5 seconds, it told me. It passes the Turing test, Alan Turing, because it could have just as well been a human, except I would have known it wasn't a human because of the speed at which it delivered the result. That and all the other things that are going on. We're almost like fish in a hot saucepan. We don't realize how hot it is getting around us. And time is meant to be a proxy for that. I'm sure there could be better proxies, but that's that vector.
Well, let me go for one more. Then thank you. Is that if I was running a corporation, I would be thinking, I want to manage risk, reduce risk, depending on what definition you're using, but I want to increase certainty and decrease uncertainty. So I'm trying to push things to the left and down on that chart so that I can focus my attention more clearly in the executive function of the organization on those uncertainties, and the unknowns. Do you see that as a dynamic in this, or is that, am I making something up here?
Of course, it's a dynamic. About 1,000 years ago, I was a young officer in the Irish military. You might have noticed that from paraphernalia there on the wall. We never use the word risk. Even though I was trained particularly, to put myself in harm's way, and do so because there was a mission, there was a goal, an objective need to be achieved. And there once or twice you weren't too certain where you're going to be alive at the end of the day. Not to over dramatize it, but that's a nice soldier does. You accept that stuff. But you can't perform, you can't achieve anything meaningful without uncertainty. We're just a thing of creature. Day and night, man and woman, black and white, good and bad. There's this constant yin and yang. And if you don't have a healthy mix of stuff, then you don't have homeostasis. So you just need to make sure that you can sense and anticipate what's going on around the corner, which means that you've got a way of not having organizational blindness, my very first slide, but some way of being able to sense and getting enough of the organization, communicating clearly, coherently, using simple, non-unjargoned language, albeit through systems and tech enablement and all that, so that you've got these dashboards. But if reducing risk and having more certainty than uncertainty is fairly simplistic. Fast growth, 30% year on year, doesn't come without equally bringing a lot of uncertainty, and that's the nature of it. That's my point of view.
Yeah, so the appetite for uncertainty and capability to deal with uncertainty corresponds to organizational success then.
Well, look, I mean, Mary is her deep background is in kind of high risk finance, right? So our when we're dealing with GPs and LPs, they've got a portfolio, and they take a portfolio approach, and they will invest so much in the cash cow type business models, and so much in the high risk, and they're going to get this blended, hopefully year on year kind of outturn. An organization itself, I have huge respect for a person called Nassim Nicholas Taleb, who's written a bunch of books, a trilogy of books, one on anti-fragility. And he talks about optionality, and really in all of his statistics and theories and language and approaches, effectively what he's saying is make sure there's always more upside than downside in every decision you make. Never bet the farm. Not my grandmother would have told me, God rest her. But so many organizations do bet the farm. Total belief in the assumptions. And of course, the people that are trying to frame the deals, the corporate guys, deal makers, they'll cash their check once the deal is done, but they don't have to live with the consequences if there was the wrong advice given. But this is Mary's area of the portfolio approach and so forth, perhaps.
So let's bring Mary in.
So I would love to tie this back a little bit to the Asset Leadership Network. I think what's been so fun about the conversations we've had recently is this intersection between the ideas of the capital, value creation, which your continuum there was, I think, is a very powerful way of looking at it. And Mike, I see you noticed Sean Lyons in the comments talking, because he talks about value creation, value preservation, and value destruction, which isn't on Peader's graphic, because nobody plans to, right? But that's one of the reasons why you need to measure it. So I'll just posit a different definition of sustainable value creation, which I think similar to what you had, Peader, but I'd love you to react, is that sustainable value creation is the use of your resources. So call them capitals, call them assets, whatever you want to call them, but the use of your resources today to drive performance in a way that ensures the viability and your access to the capitals in the future. Because that one of the things that often isn't discussed is the fact that many of the capitals are not owned, they're attracted. And I think that's something that here at ALN that folks have been focusing on, is that the traditional assets that you think of are owned assets, but the capitals, especially relationship capitals and many aspects of natural capital, are not owned. So, what's your definition of sustainable value creation?
Before I answer you, I just want to, in case I forget, I wouldn't forgive myself. I didn't shout out there for Sean. I have huge respect for that man's thinking. And anyone who hasn't bought his book, get it, read it, follow him, read his stuff.
I could tell from just his one chat, this is a guy to talk to. I mean, yeah, obviously, yeah.
Well, Sean is a giant in the space, really a supremo. So Mary, your question, kind of, when I take the ISB, so we have the, the International Accounting Standards Board now has a new sibling, the International Sustainability Standards Board, and they now have a parent called IFRS. And between them, they're responsible for the integrated framework. And I got myself into a spot of bother over the weekend, tic-tacking with a colleague of mine, another giant in this space, a lady called Dr. Victoria Hirth. And huge authority in the whole area of the purpose organization and things like that. And she led a charge in challenging the definition of sustainability as defined by ISB at their recent board meeting.
And a big conversation.
Big conversation there, but the two key words in there are the managing the sustainable management. Paraphrasing now, of resources and relationships, right? And resources are shared, relationships are temporal. So you're absolutely right. I'd be 100% aligned with you in that regard. And ownership. We have legal constructs for ownership, of course, but essentially from business model perspective, an operating model perspective, and that's why social and personal relationship capital in the stack there. Your relationship with your customers, if it's not built on trust and so forth, they'll simply choose to go to somebody else, because we now know that people would pay a premium for a different product if they got a better feeling. I don't mean that at the level of commodities, but even, for example, the kind of one thing that the democratization of information has done is given this freedom to people, particularly in the knowledge space, and they're quite picky now and choosy about who they want to work for. So it all comes back to the whole, the temporal aspect of value and assets. So you got to be far more careful, and the only way to be careful is to have, if you're lucky enough, I try to help organizations that maybe are around for a long time, and for the hell of them, they just can't define their purpose. They can describe what they do, their activities, but why are we here? So long ago, why are we here? If you've got a strong why, that's got this strong kind of societal thing, then that's more than half. But I'm talking too much now. I'm agreeing with you, Mary. Resources and relationships. I agree with the ISB kind of definition there. Yeah.
I'd like to, first of all, thank you both for helping us connect to our why in a way that we hadn't without you, very specifically. We understood that asset leadership was different than asset management. And most of our colleagues are dealing in that value preservation world and think that that is the entire world. They've been dealing with facilities, they've been dealing with engines and pumps, and that's what they think is everything. And we had a challenging time understanding how to talk about the value creation aspect of leadership. And I see why Jim loved your presentation, and I think we need to do more with it. But what Mary has, set us up basically to be ready for Peter's presentation. And I see that the value that the ALN brings is connecting that structured governance to a concept of a multi-value world. And that is where we can provide the most assistance to organizations of all types. And what can we do together? I want to connect more with ESG Exchange. Mary's involved in other organizations. I now need to reach out to Sean Lyons and find out what he's involved in and how your thought leadership can be put into actionable, repeatable activities. Sean, I believe you have an event coming up this year. You want to plug that at all? Or why did I say Sean? Peter, I was looking at Peter and thinking Sean.
Okay.
Yeah, the ESG Exchange has an event.
Well, yes, okay. And by the way, Mary is a member of the advisory council now. I bring her with her cohort, rich cohort of relationships in the States and so forth. So yeah, well, we've got a number of events, but there's one particular one that we're very focused on. We expect to have a physical event in London in about 4 or 5 months' time, where we're not an 800-pound gorilla, but 1,000-pound gorillas, let's say, in the world, will assemble, and we will agree to formally collaborate, particularly in the context of data management and so forth. And what we've realized, and just the thing about relationships and so forth, when I was a young boy and I was an officer cadet in the military, I was told by a general, the first weeks in the military college in Ireland here, tiny little army, of course, tiny country, but some good thinkers there in Ireland. And he said the next world war would be about water. Wow, water. And he wasn't talking about the Middle East was a thing back in those days, in the 70s. And then when I was working in the States with the big insurers in the cat risk area, that's the one thing that worries you most, obviously, weather. There's nothing new about any of the E, S, and G stuff. Nothing new about the E stuff at all. I'm choosing to believe that the scientists are not huddled up in a conspiracy and they're telling us pretty much the truth. They're also telling us that they're not certain about lots of things, right? But what they are certain about are the trends. There's truth in the trends. Time series is where there's more truth in it than a particular report at a point in time, like a balance sheet almost. Time is running out, and that's why we're doing in a handful of years with all these regulations what was done over decades in the area of financial audit. And we realize, we're all, there are no giants in the room, and we're all making it up as we go along. But we're all having to do it in good faith and collaborating openly, violently, transparently with each other, such that we can do as much as we can, as quickly as we can, to try and limit the adversarial impacts that are certainly ahead of us. So that's what that meeting, that's one aspect of what that meeting would be about. And we're a minnow in the schema of things. But happy to be at the global table of tables, certainly. For sure, yeah.
I'll just chime in. Your first slide, Peter. I had a preview of your slides and I saw it, and it didn't it didn't really register with me until you started talking about it. And it's again this overlap in the way we're all thinking, I think, is very powerful. That network map you're talking about, each node has a job to be done. Each is doing something that's supporting the overall value creation. And I think, we've been working with Mike on a program to help create a map of how the node for asset management would interact with the rest of the company and with the rest of that system. And I think that's really exciting, and maybe I feel like that's a place where we can all help drive change, is to make it much more deliberate and clear what each of those nodes is doing. And there are different nodes for different kinds of governance. And asset management is certainly one of those, or several of those. And, you know, I don't know if you have an example of how that's working in companies today, or I think a lot of that, we'll call it network management, is pretty ad hoc.
It is, and you know, I read, just blew my mind last night, a paper from one of the organizations coming together in a few months' time, the whole area of data management and knowledge graphing and creating ontologies and taxonomies and so forth. And in a handful of years, the organizational blindness that I tried to communicate, that idea of organizational blindness in that image, we're not going to be as blind. Because one of the great things, what we're finding is that, you know, everybody is in agreement with regards to the fundamentals, right? I'm sitting in a task force in ISO with regards to the definition of risk, and there won't be any agreement, I don't think, because everyone's minding their own turf, right? There's a bit of politics going on and so forth, but no one's disagreeing with regards to the fundamentals. And so the work, and by the way, Mary, the stuff that I saw from you last week, that blew my mind as well. I'm glad we're following through later this week. But effectively, what you've done there is you've because of what you're doing in the IRC and integrated thinking and the capitals and so forth, you've effectively found a way to reimagine that and parameterizing all the different relationships and mapping it in a way that's super intuitive. And we're living in a world now where people are collaborating more freely. There's something as after changing in our psychic and networks of people and so forth. So, you know, it is the Wild West today, but my goodness, what a great time to be in this space of what your folk are doing, what we're doing in value and in risk and so forth. Getting the ILN involved in the ESG exchange, establishing a liaison between 251 and 309 in particular. It is 251, and I didn't make a mistake there, did I? Senior moments are becoming,
yes. You're right.
they're becoming more frequent. I do apologize in my case.
Oh,
But
no.
liaison there, two-way flows, and so we're in an era also now of collaboration, because technology and just the whole sense of the freedom of data, how it's got to flow, for ultimately in all our interests of preservation and value creation.
Well, I'm glad Mary mentioned what she is doing with us. Thank you, Mary. Mary came to us as president of Smarter Companies, and she has since helped co-found Insights 7, and they have a software for helping organizations establish what their values are and how to link them with their activities, so that that complex slide that you started with begins to start making sense. And she has volunteered, she and her partner, Mike Hogan. Thank you, Mike and Mary.
Who's here, huge shout out, because he came from the IT world, and so knew how to make those connect those dots, right? So.
Yeah.
So they requested an ALN member to volunteer, and Art Curlin, who is the director of capital and asset management for University Health, is working with them to go through the process, and then they're going to present it to people. And the insights7.com website has free capabilities. So she's not even selling this to people. If you don't want to, if you can jump in and start using it, please help make your organization better. We really appreciate that. And for those who have to leave on the hour, thank you for joining us, but I don't want to stop this conversation. Peter and Jim and Mary, do you have time?
Just to shout out, the first time I saw Insight 7 was last week. I'd heard about it before, but when Mary was explaining it all to me, what I liked, I mean, I don't like isms, Heather isms, right? Any isms. What I liked about it was that I was checking off my mind as Mary was explaining stuff to me, the linkages with authoritative sources. You know, so that when you lean in on that kind of thinking, the quality and the richness of the thinking that is now essentially brought to life digitally in the form of the platform, you can just rest assured that you're leaning in on strong stuff, right? Because the tech is great, but the thinking behind the tech, joining all these dots and so forth, is that's where the power is in that, I believe.
So I wanted to have a chance to jump in on what Peter was talking about and what Mary talked about, and then what Peter just got back to. We've been focused in the past years on the complexity of the world, and I think what we're talking about here is simplifying a lot of those complications so that people making decisions can get their head around them. My head is stretched by this conversation, that's for sure. But to allow people to understand these complex topics. And I think in all three of these areas, we're making a lot of progress in making things simpler and easier to understand and to communicate to people so that they're easier to activate and make happen in organizations.
Well, one of the bits of information that helps the asset leadership network with our message is 90% of the value is in intangibles. That's what we're talking about. It's not that we discount the buildings, the pumps, and the engines. They are still there. And as Peter pointed out, they are still critical. But leadership of the organization now requires a different type of thinking that incorporates that in its proper place in terms of the definition of assets to manage. So we do have a question here for you, Peter, about equity in how it's being discussed in the governance committee. And this is from Cecilia Mowat, who is very helpful with us in terms of involving all relevant stakeholders, and not saying stakeholders because that in the US is a derogatory term or an exclusionary term. If you didn't have a stake, then you weren't even considered. So for us participants or constituents, but I don't want to get into, etymology. What about equity, and how is governance viewing that and incorporating it into any documents you're creating?
So equity is kind of a legal construct. It belongs more to the kind of corporate governance, the capital structure of an organization. We in 37,000 were talking about governance, which is this thing, whatever about the legalities. I mean, the entity itself, and it's comprised of 100 shares of A, and with the cap table and so forth, and all that works out. But that legal construct, the entity it has a persona in law, but not in real life. It's not a person, but the brain of it is the board, let us say, and the management of it is the muscle, and everybody else makes up all the tissue and the sinews and so forth. So we didn't really get into the equity side of the discussion because we're more focused on whatever your structure. And in fact, we had a little rule that we were using ourselves. I call the mafia test, right? Even the grandfather of the mafia organization, he or she, by and large he, sadly, given men, will have a perception of value, creation and destruction. We mightn't agree with it. They won't have a cap table like we understand cap tables. So we didn't really get into that, right? Ours was more on you have the ship, you're going out into heavy seas. Remember, you've only got small boats in the harbor. Small boat can't go out to heavy seas, but you need a big boat to travel heavy seas to get your goods to foreign markets. And so what it takes to pick the right vessel, have the right crew, steer it the right way, get it from point A to point B, leaving the legals and the cap tables and so forth. So I'm sorry, that's not a good answer, but that's just
No,
a fact.
that's
Didn't get into
a
that.
very honest answer.
But
Mary?
again, that's probably Mary, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so well, I appreciate the way you put it, Peter. I do think that the concepts of equity are embedded if you are disciplined about understanding whatever we call it, relationship capitals with all kinds of people and into your decision-making process. So, you know, the way we approach things is to say, obviously, when you make a management decision, you're focused on like the first level variables. We're trying to change performance. You know, what is it going to cost us? How is that going to look? But then you have to have that context to say, okay, but what's it going to do to our relationship with our employees, to our community, our you know, different social and customers and suppliers. So, you know, just structuring your decisions where you are taking all that into account is a really big step forward. It doesn't guarantee that it's going to change things, but it's going a lot farther, I think, than just not having it be part of the decision process. So I think that's what's exciting about all of this when you get down to the granular level, is that if you empower people with good data and a way to express this, then they can actually incorporate that into a decision.
Yeah. In 37,000, the first principle is on the purpose principle. Second is on the value creation model. And I led the team that negotiated with what became the merger between SEMA and AICPA. We said, we want to steal your business model framework. We're going to copy paste it, drop it into 37,000. We made changes, and we're happy that we had their fingerprints on that changes as well, because it was an easier construct to present and articulate at a board level than the business model canvas. But it's interesting when you look at the four nodes, you know, defining value, creating value, delivering value, then sustaining value, kind of portioning the surpluses between employees and all the, you know, the customers and so forth. So that's why I find it so easy to align with the ISB definition, resources and cap and relationships. That's where a lot of the value is, the intangible values are. For sure. I was when I heard the word equity, I just put myself into a narrow mindset. But Mary had a broader perspective on it. She of course is right in that regard, in answer to the question.
Thank you, Mary, and thank you, Peter, for your forthrightness. Jim, we could talk all day long, but I think we've got to kind of get towards an end. But I would like you to move us in that direction.
Oh, I'm thrilled to just sit here and listen to this conversation. I think it's a challenge for the ALN and for the asset management community to up our game. We need to learn new language, new way of thinking about these things. And I'm excited to think that perhaps Peter and Mary are thinking and understanding more about how asset management and asset leadership are a part of their constructs as well. So I think those connections and how to develop those going forward is a real opportunity for all of us, hopefully.
Yes,
absolutely, and that's why I think engagement, liaison, the exchange, the ESG exchange, liaison with 309 and so forth, and just absorb these other languages, apply them to your context, and that's a part of where I think your future lies. But leadership is about bringing people where they don't want to go, where they're wondering, why do I have to go there? I'm so used to where I'm at. So I commend you for your leadership, because it is required.
well, thank you for that.
Sorry. I got a crazy idea. In May, the second week of May, ISO TC 251 is having a plenary in-person meeting in Philadelphia. And you know, as head of the U.S. Technical Advisory Group, we're the host. And we have a plan tentatively to have on Wednesday afternoon of a week-long meeting, you know, some number of hours devoted to some sort of a discussion or workshop. And I was thinking how awesome it would be to have Peader and Mary, perhaps Chris Roberts from the IAM, you know, someone from the ALN, perhaps Mr. Lyons, and have make that workshop be, you know, an extension of this discussion and expose these representatives from around the world to the ideas that we're talking about and the possibilities that they present.
I'd be enthusiastic. Let's have the conversation. I haven't been to Philly for many years, but yeah, absolutely.
That would be awesome. Yeah.
Excellent. And then Mary, thank you for giving us, you know, a definitive next step. We don't have it scheduled yet, but we know we're going to be getting a little bit more exposure to how these worlds come together in a very tangible demonstration with University Health and Art Kurland. So thank you and Mike Hogan for that.
I look forward to it. Yeah.
All right. Well, I don't want to, but I've got to do the wrap up and thank everybody again. Peader, it's just been a real pleasure getting to know you, and we love the Irish storytelling because that's what it's all about. Is we all want to sit around a campfire and hear good stories, and you have a real good way of explaining this increasingly complex world in a way that we can get our hands around it. So thank you for all the work that you do. And
Thank you so much.
yeah, Mary, it's just been a joy getting to know you and working with you.
Thank you.
So thanks for your time with this and the other activities. Jim, just hats off to you. I always enjoy being with you. And I'll be in DC February 14th, so I'll see you in person soon. I'm looking forward to that. And Onuma Inc. Has some things really neat in store as their platinum member. We're not going to announce them until the February 7th, but look forward to that. And CGI just came on board, and they have had representatives on the board of ALN. So they've already been involved and make excellent contributions, but we really welcome them and thank Jacobs and ABS Quality Evaluations, Definitive Logic, and our other organizational members, which we're talking to a few to expand the list. And if anybody is interested in membership, you can go to our website or email me. Then join us for another luminary. Peter Kohler helped set up the Asset Management Council more than 20 years ago, and I have the privilege of working with him on this value and benefits from asset management programs. And we'll be talking with Kimono Numa, presenting about LA Community Colleges, and John Hardwick from South Wales Transport, New South Wales Transport. So thank you all for attending, and look forward to future conversations.
Super.
Thank you very much indeed. I enjoyed it thoroughly. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
God bless all. Bye-bye.